I'll get your subscription, my pretty. And your little dog, too.
Hey there, I'm the professor, Dr. Chris McCusker, and this is another episode in the Quarantine Management Institute. We're talking about leading in a crisis, and we've talked about 4 stages of crisis leadership: pre-crisis, survival, recovery, and renewal. We've talked about different types of leadership, how we analyze leadership. We're going to now look at another case that happened when I was living in New Orleans and on the faculty at the A.B. Freeman School of Business at Tulane. And that's the case of the BP oil spill. The Deepwater Horizon rig exploded, causing 13 people to die. Human tragedy. If you lost your father, your brother, your son in that disaster, that is a horrible outcome, you know. And then on top of that, the explosion caused the well to spew oil into the Gulf of Mexico, which then washed up onto the shore and the coast of Louisiana. The coast of Louisiana is a national and world natural treasure. It's a very unique ecosystem, very delicate and fragile one, and you can remember the images of pelicans covered in oil, and no shrimp, no crawfish, no seafood. Fish are dying. People's livelihoods destroyed. People's homes who live in that coastal area destroyed by oil. It was a human-made disaster, and it cost lives and did tremendous environmental damage. How did it happen? How did that happen? You know, I mean, accidents do happen, but there was something about the BP case that really upset folks because it was very much preventable. Not only was the explosion preventable, but the leadership example has been highly criticized as well. So we'll talk about those things. Let me go back in time a little bit with BP. BP was a kind of second-rate energy company until Lord John Brown took the helm. Lord John Brown, PhD in physics, and an aggressive leader, built BP into the second largest energy company in the world, and he did so in a very quick manner. He built through acquisition, so BP acquired Amoco and became BP Amoco, and then hundreds of other companies. They became the world's largest producer of solar energy when they bought SolarX, and suddenly BP was formidable, right up there with ExxonMobil as one of the top 2 energy companies in the world. Lord John Brown was also a visionary when it comes to environmental policy. He, in a series of speeches, one at Stanford University, another at Yale University, which I attended when I was on the faculty there, he announced BP's intention to voluntarily reduce their harmful emissions in the environment at a level that was beyond what would be required by Kyoto. The Kyoto Protocol, never ratified in the United States, but it set forth standards for reducing harmful emissions in the environment. BP said, we're going past Kyoto, and we're doing it voluntarily, and we're doing it on this aggressive timetable. And they did. They reduced their emissions according to John Brown's commitment, and they did so ahead of schedule. So he was generally, I think, in academics, in a lot of circles, regarded as an exemplary leader. Somebody who took this company from like number 8 to number 2, who set an agenda of progressive, environmentally sound environmental policies. They changed their logo to the sun. And, I was actually pretty impressed with BP. After my colleague Jim Phils and I interviewed John Brown, it was either that we're painfully naive if we believe this guy, or we just really rub shoulders with a really great visionary corporate leader. It wasn't entirely clear. I think there's room to be cynical. BP had a track record of environmental disaster. They had some leaks in the pipelines in Alaska, which caused damage to that environment up there. There was an oil refinery explosion in Texas that cost lives and also environmental damage. This guy's coming to talk about how good they are as citizens and how sound their environmental policies are. We were a little cynical, but we're thinking, well, let's give him a chance. Let's see what happens. Well, John Brown stepped down, and his successor was Tony Hayward, somebody who had risen through the ranks at BP, did exceptional work in Russia, was known as a star inside BP, somebody who was really close, a close member of John Brown's team. Smart. Everybody will tell you how smart Tony Hayward was. Now, when you acquire a company, like BP acquiring Amoco or any of the hundreds of companies they acquired, you have to sell it to investment bankers who have the money that's going to finance that acquisition. They're going to give you a loan that you can use to buy that company, but you got to pay them back. And part of the reason they're going to give you this loan is that you're going to cut costs. So we got a human resource department here at Amoco. We got a human resource department here at BP. We don't need two of them. We're going to cut out one of them, and it's going to save money, and that's why it's in the financial interest for us to buy Amoco and for you to give us the money to help us do that. And across the board, we're gonna cut costs, and when we combine these companies, there are synergies. Synergies with respect to assets. There were upstream and downstream assets that combined to make an overall energy platform that was stronger than either BP or Amoco previously. And then synergies could be realized with cost cutting, which included people. We don't need as many people in certain areas. And the overall idea of a merger usually has to satisfy investment bankers who are looking to see how does each side make the other side better, and how does this economic value proposition work. Will they come out ahead in the end? Critical for BP pulling off these acquisitions is to cut costs. That's the main idea. And Tony Hayward came in with aggressive cost cutting. Across the board, 20% cost cutting was initiated. Now, if you're looking at BP, you're looking at a complex organization that operates in every part of the world. You're looking at different business segments. To look at a case-by-case basis of what should be cut would be too time-consuming. We don't have time. We got to cut costs, and we got to cut costs now. Across the board, 20% cost cutting. At the same time, Tony Hayward recognizes that safety is important, and I think he genuinely believed that safety is important. They had the explosion in Texas City, and they, I think espoused safety, but at the same time, we're cutting costs across the board. When the Deepwater Horizon well exploded, people died, and there was the environmental disaster which happened as well. It could have been avoided. There were problems that people on the ground said, look, this is dangerous, we need to fix this, and they were ignored because we're cutting costs, and we need to cut costs right away. We're going to get to that. Sit tight. We're going to get to your safety issue soon enough. We got to cut these costs. So there were plenty of warnings in the pre-crisis stage that were ignored, which dramatically affected the severity of the other stages of the crisis. So one of the things we learned in the BP case was that there can be motivation to not be as open and forthcoming about mistakes that were made when people are being blamed for the crisis situation that cost lives and environmental damage. So I think one of the issues that existed with BP was that they kept changing their numbers about how much oil was spilled. They underestimated. Now it turns out to be 3 times more than what you said. And then also the communication wasn't there. finding and getting Tony Hayward to talk about it was difficult. One day in particular, Tony Hayward, to show that he cares, went to the coast of Louisiana and probably hadn't slept in days, under tremendous pressure. Was hounded by reporters who were accusing him of not caring. You don't care about the people who died. You don't care about Louisiana. And in defending himself, he said something along the lines of, look, I really do care. Trust me, I want this to be done to be over as much as anybody else. I really want my life back. PR disaster. 13 people died. If one of those people was your uncle, your son, your brother, your father, and this guy talking about how he wants his life back, rubbed people the wrong way. So I think Tony Hayward ultimately lost his job, probably for that statement. BP had its reputation severely damaged. Their programs to become a leader in environmentally sound energy policy was completely undermined. Whatever gains they made from Lord John Brown's visionary ideas about environmentally sound energy were lost. They ended up being the villain. And I think to this day still suffer some in terms of their reputation. Their reputation has never really been fully restored from that disaster. We'll have more to say about leaders and how to lead in crisis. But I think in the BP case, what stands out is the lack of transparency, the opacity, the failure to admit a mistake, which seems to be dishonest or is perceived as being dishonest, and the insensitivity to the well-being of people when you say the wrong thing under pressure. A crisis is a very unforgiving environment, and if you don't over-communicate, you're likely to be misconstrued. The thing about Scott Cowan and Katrina is that he had to change his mind about decisions, and he might have said some things that were wrong. But you see this guy every day, you see him communicating, and he's there. You trust him. And if he says something the wrong way, you can forgive him, because he's under a lot of pressure. But if this is the only time we see you, and you say something like you want your life back, it's a very unforgiving environment. So, leading in crisis, the BP case, a very difficult example, but one we must learn from as well.